Harmony Gulch was a place where the sun always seemed angry. It beat down on the wooden buildings, turning the dust to powder that swirled in the streets. The townsfolk, faces weathered like old leather, squinted as they went about their business. They were a suspicious bunch, always watching, always judging. New faces weren't welcome. Harmony Gulch liked things just the way they were. The saloon, the Golden Nugget, was the heart of the town. Men gathered there to drink, gamble, and swap stories, their voices loud and boisterous. Outside, children played games in the dirt, mimicking the cowboys they admired. But even their laughter sounded a little rough around the edges, like the town itself. Old Man Hemlock, who ran the general store, was the closest thing Harmony Gulch had to a leader. He'd been there longer than anyone could remember, and his word carried weight. He wasn't a bad man, not really, but he was set in his ways and didn't take kindly to change. He kept a close eye on everything that happened in town, and he always had an opinion to share, whether you wanted it or not. Martha, the baker, was a kinder soul. Her sweet rolls were famous for miles around, and she always had a smile for everyone. But even Martha knew that Harmony Gulch could be a harsh place, especially for those who didn't fit in. She'd seen newcomers come and go, some welcomed, but most driven away by the town's coldness. The stagecoach arrived only once a week, bringing supplies and the occasional traveler. It was always an event, drawing a crowd to see who or what had come to Harmony Gulch. Most times it was nothing exciting, just more of the same. The dust swirled higher than usual that day, kicked up not by the wind, but by the hooves of a lone horse. The rider sat tall and straight, a figure against the blazing sun. It wasn't the stagecoach, that much was clear. This was something different, something unexpected. The horse was a magnificent paint, its coat a patchwork of white and brown, muscles rippling beneath its skin. It moved with a grace that seemed out of place in the rough and tumble town. But it was the rider that truly drew the eye. She was young, barely more than a girl, but her face was weathered, tanned by the sun and wind. Her eyes, the color of the desert sky after a storm, were sharp and watchful. She wore clothes made of deerskin, adorned with beads and feathers, clothes that belonged not in Harmony Gulch, but in the wild lands beyond. A hush fell over the town as she rode slowly down Main Street. The children stopped their games, the men paused their drinking, and even Old Man Hemlock peered out from behind the counter of his store. All eyes were on her, trying to figure out who she was and what she wanted. She didn't speak, didn't acknowledge the stares. She simply rode, her gaze sweeping over the buildings, the faces taking it all in. There was a quiet confidence about her, a sense of knowing that made some of the townsfolk uneasy. Finally, she stopped in front of the saloon, dismounted with a fluid motion, and tied her horse to the hitching post. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the creak of leather and the snorting of the horse. Then, she turned and looked directly at the crowd. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a challenge in her eyes, a silent question. What are you going? Harmony Gulch was about to find out just who this mysterious rider was, and why she had come. But one thing was certain. Things were about to change. Big Joe's words hung in the air, a challenge and an insult all in one. The girl didn't respond, but her silence only fueled the simmering unease in the town. The townsfolk began to murmur, their whispers like the rustling of dry leaves in a gathering storm. Apache, someone hissed, the word laced with fear and disgust. Others nodded, their eyes narrowing. They'd heard stories of Apache raids, of stolen cattle and scalped settlers. The girl's clothes, her bearing, confirmed their worst fears. She's probably a spy, another voice whispered, scouting out the town before they attack. Old Man Hemlock emerged from his store, his face grim. He pushed his way through the crowd, his eyes fixed on the girl. "What's your business here, girl?" he demanded, his voice raspy with age and suspicion. "State your name and your purpose." The girl finally spoke, her voice low but clear, cutting through the murmurs. "My name is Sarah," she said. "I came to find information." "Information?" Hemlock scoffed. "About what?" "About how many guns we have. About how to burn our homes. About my family," Sarah replied, her voice unwavering. "I was born here in Harmony Gulch." I'm looking for my parents." A ripple of surprise ran through the crowd. Born in Harmony Gulch? That couldn't be right. No one remembered a white child raised by Apaches. It was a lie, they thought, a trick to gain their trust. "Liar!" a man shouted from the back of the crowd. "You're nothing but a savage." The whispers grew louder, more accusatory. Sarah stood her ground, her face impassive, but inside, she felt a pang of hurt. She had hoped for a different reception, for a chance to explain. But Harmony Gulch was judging her before she even had a chance to speak. Martha, the baker, watched from across the street, her heart heavy. She saw the fear and prejudice in the eyes of her neighbors, and she knew that Sarah was in danger. Martha had always believed in giving people a chance, in looking beyond appearances. But she was just one woman, and the tide of suspicion was rising fast. Big Joe stepped forward, his face red with anger. "Get out of Harmony Gulch, Apache girl," he snarled. "You're not welcome here. Go back where you belong." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and defiance. "This is where I belong," she said, "whether you like it or not." And with that, she turned and walked towards the edge of town, leaving behind a trail of whispers and suspicion. The storm was brewing, and Harmony Gulch was about to be caught in its fury. As Sarah rode away, the whispers in Harmony Gulch intensified, transforming into full-blown rumors. Every story, every fear, every prejudice found its voice in the tales that spread like wildfire through the town. "She's been sent to poison our water supply," someone declared, pointing to the well with a trembling hand. "I saw her talking to some Indians out by the creek," another claimed, planning an attack, no doubt. The rumors grew wilder with each telling. Sarah became a symbol of everything the town feared: the unknown, the untamed, the savage wilderness that surrounded them. Martha tried to quell the rising panic, reminding people that Sarah had claimed to be looking for her family. But her voice was drowned out by the chorus of fear and suspicion. "Family? What family would abandon a child to the Apaches?" someone scoffed. "She's lying, I tell you. She's probably an orphan, raised by those heathens to hate us." Old Man Hemlock, ever the pragmatist, saw an opportunity to solidify his position as the town's leader. He stoked the flames of fear, subtly guiding the rumors to suit his own agenda. "We can't be too careful," he warned, his voice grave. "We need to protect our town, our families, from this threat." He organized a patrol, made up of the town's roughest men, to keep an eye on Sarah and any suspicious activity. Big Joe, eager to prove his loyalty to the town, volunteered to lead the patrol. As the sun set, casting long shadows across Harmony Gulch, the atmosphere grew even more tense. The townsfolk barricaded their doors, loaded their guns, and waited, their fear turning into anger. Meanwhile, Sarah camped outside of town, near the creek. She built a small fire, its flames dancing in the darkness, a beacon in the hostile night. She knew she was being watched, that every move she made was being scrutinized, but she refused to be intimidated. She had come to Harmony Gulch for a reason, and she wouldn't leave until she had found what she was looking for. She closed her eyes, and a memory surfaced, a fleeting image of a woman's face, a lullaby sung in a language she barely remembered. Her parents. They were out there, somewhere, and she would find them, no matter what Harmony Gulch threw her way. The rumors and the fear wouldn't deter her. They only made her more determined. The crackling fire seemed to whisper secrets as Sarah drifted into sleep, and the memories came, vivid and real, like a dream unfolding under the desert stars. She was a small child, no more than 3 years old, lost and alone in the vast wilderness. Her clothes were torn, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She remembered a wagon, a loud noise, and then nothing but darkness. Then warmth. Gentle hands lifting her, soothing her cries. A woman's face, kind and compassionate, her eyes filled with concern. It wasn't her mother, not the one from her fleeting memory, but this woman offered a different kind of love, a love that saved her life. This was Nalin, the Apache woman who found her, alone and abandoned, after a raid gone wrong. Lynch took Sarah back to her tribe, the Warm Springs Apaches, and raised her as her own daughter. Sarah, whom the Apaches called Little Dove, grew up learning their ways. She learned to ride horses bareback, to hunt with a bow and arrow, to track animals through the desert. She learned their language, their customs, their respect for the land. She learned about survival, about resilience, about the importance of family and community. The Apaches were a family now, and she loved them fiercely. Lynch taught her about herbs and healing, about the power of nature and the spirits that dwelled within it. She taught her to be strong, to be brave, to never give up, even when faced with adversity. The other children in the tribe accepted her without question. They were her brothers and sisters, her playmates, her confidants. They shared their laughter, their tears, their dreams. Life wasn't easy. The Apaches faced constant threats from settlers and soldiers who sought to take their land and destroy their way of life. But they persevered, holding on to their traditions, their beliefs, their spirit. Sarah learned to fight, to defend herself and her tribe. She became a skilled warrior, respected by all. But she never forgot the kindness that had saved her life, the love that had nurtured her. She knew she was different, that her skin was lighter, her hair a different color. But the Apaches never made her feel like an outsider. They embraced her, loved her, and made her one of their own. As the years passed, Sarah never forgot the fleeting image of her birth mother's face, the lullaby she used to sing. She knew, deep down, that she needed to find her to understand where she came from. That's why she had returned to Harmony Gulch, the place where her life had begun, and the place where she hoped to find answers. The flashback ended, and Sarah awoke, the fire now just embers, but her resolve stronger than ever. The next morning, Sarah returned to Harmony Gulch. The streets were quieter, but the eyes were still watching her, following her every move. She knew she needed to find someone she could trust, someone who would listen to her story without prejudice. She remembered seeing Martha, the baker, the day before. There was a kindness in her eyes, a warmth that had stood out from the cold stares of the other townsfolk. Sarah decided to take a chance. She walked into the bakery, the smell of freshly baked bread filling the air. Martha looked up, her face etched with concern. "Sarah, isn't it?" she said softly. "What can I do for you, dear?" Sarah hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I need to talk to someone," she said. "Someone who will listen." Martha nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "Come into the back," she said, leading Sarah into a small, cozy room behind the bakery. Sarah sat down at a wooden table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She told Martha her story, about being lost as a child, about being raised by the Apaches, about the fleeting memories of her birth mother. "I was born here, in Harmony Gulch," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My parents, I don't know their names. I don't know anything about them. I only know that I need to find them." Martha listened patiently, her eyes never leaving Sarah's face. When Sarah finished, Martha reached across the table and took her hand. "I believe you," she said. "I can see the truth in your eyes." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Finally, someone believed her. "Do you know anything about my parents?" she asked. "Anything at all?" Martha thought for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There was a young couple," she said slowly, "who came to Harmony Gulch about 20 years ago. They were farmers, I think. They had a little girl. But then, there was a tragedy, a wagon accident out by the creek. The couple, they didn't make it." Sarah's heart sank. "What about the child?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Martha looked at her sadly. "No one ever found her," she said. "Everyone assumed she was taken by wild animals, or worse." Sarah felt a tear roll down her cheek. "So, her parents were dead, and everyone thought she was dead too. Do you know their names?" she asked. Martha hesitated. I think their name was Miller," she said. "John and Mary Miller." Miller. The name sounded familiar, like a faint echo from a distant past. Sarah knew she had a long road ahead of her, but at least now she had a name, a place to start. And she had Martha, a kind soul who believed in her, a beacon of hope in the darkness of Harmony Gulch. Martha's kindness, however, did little to stem the rising tide of prejudice in Harmony Gulch. The rumors continued to swirl, fueled by fear and suspicion, and now they were being actively stoked by a man named Jedediah Jed Stone. Jed was a rancher, bitter and resentful after losing a large portion of his cattle to a recent drought. He blamed everyone but himself for his misfortunes, and he saw Sarah as an easy target for his anger. He gathered a group of like-minded men who were already suspicious of outsiders and eager to find someone to blame for their own troubles. They met in the saloon, their voices low and menacing, fueled by whiskey and resentment. "She's a savage," Jed snarled, slamming his fist on the table. "We can't let her stay here. She'll bring nothing but trouble." But Martha said, one of the men began, but Jed cut him off with a sneer. "Martha's a fool," he said. "She's always been too soft. We need to protect ourselves, and that means getting rid of that Apache girl." They began to openly harass Sarah, following her through the streets, shouting insults and making veiled threats. They vandalized her campsite, scattering her belongings and leaving a dead animal as a warning. Sarah tried to ignore them, to focus on her search for information about her parents. But their constant harassment made it difficult, and she could feel the tension in the town growing thicker every day. One afternoon, as she was walking back from the cemetery, where she had been searching for the Miller family plot, Jed and his men cornered her in an alley. "We've had enough of you, Apache girl," Jed said, his eyes filled with malice. "It's time for you to leave." Sarah stood her ground, her face impassive. "I'm not leaving," she said. "This is my home, too." Jed laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "Home? You don't belong here," he said. "You belong with the savages." He stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "If you don't leave by sundown," he whispered, "you'll regret it." Sarah stared back at him, her eyes filled with defiance. She wouldn't be intimidated. She wouldn't be driven away. She would stand her ground, no matter what it took. But she knew, deep down, that the situation was escalating and that Harmony Gulch was on the verge of exploding. The hate was palpable, and she could feel it everywhere. Back at her campsite, Sarah tried to ignore Jed's threat, but the words echoed in her mind. She was tired, hungry, and discouraged. The search for her family felt hopeless, and the hatred of the town was a heavy burden to bear. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows, a small figure approached her campsite. It was a young boy, no older than 8, named Billy. He was the son of the blacksmith, a quiet, shy child who often kept to himself. Sarah had seen him watching her from a distance, his eyes filled with curiosity rather than hostility. She wondered what he wanted. Billy stopped a few feet away, clutching something in his hands. He looked up at Sarah, his eyes wide and a little scared. "My ma. She said you might be thirsty," he mumbled, offering her a small, dented tin cup filled with water. Sarah was surprised. She hadn't expected kindness from anyone in Harmony Gulch, especially not after Jed's threat. She knelt down, meeting Billy's gaze. "Thank you," she said softly, taking the cup. "That's very kind of you." She drank the water slowly, savoring its coolness. It was the best water she had ever tasted. Billy shuffled his feet, looking down at the ground. "Mima, she doesn't think you're a savage," he said, his voice barely audible. She says you're just lost." Sarah smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Your ma is a wise woman," she said. "Tell her thank you for me." Billy nodded, then turned and ran back towards town, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Sarah watched him go, her heart filled with a flicker of hope. Not everyone in Harmony Gulch hated her. There were still some good people, some people who were willing to see past the prejudice and the fear. The act of kindness, small as it was, gave her the strength to keep going. It reminded her that there was still goodness in the world, even in a place as harsh as Harmony Gulch. She knew she still faced danger, that Jed and his men were still out there, waiting for her to make a mistake. But she also knew that she wasn't alone. She had Martha, and now she had Billy and his mother. And that was enough to keep her going, at least for one more day. She would keep searching for her family, keep fighting for her place in Harmony Gulch, and keep hoping for a better future. She would not let the darkness win. The fragile peace that Billy's kindness had brought was shattered the next morning. Jed and his men rode into town, their faces grim, their voices loud and accusatory. "She did it," Jed shouted, pointing towards Sarah's campsite, which was now empty. "She poisoned the water supply." The townsfolk gasped, their faces filled with fear and outrage. The well was the lifeblood of Harmony Gulch, their only source of fresh water. To poison it was an act of war, an unforgivable crime. "We found tracks leading from her camp to the well," another man added, his voice dripping with malice. "And the water, it smells foul like something rotten." Old Man Hemlock, ever the opportunist, seized the moment. "We can't let this go unpunished," he declared, his voice ringing with authority. "She's a danger to us all. We need to bring her to justice." But the justice Hemlock had in mind wasn't a fair trial. It was something far more brutal, something born of fear and prejudice. Martha, hearing the commotion, rushed into the street, her face pale with alarm. "This can't be true," she said, her voice trembling. "Sarah wouldn't do something like that." "How do you know?" Jed sneered, turning on her with a hateful glare. "Are you protecting her? Are you in on it too?" Martha stood her ground, her eyes filled with defiance. "I know Sarah," she said. "She's not a murderer. There must be some mistake." But her words were drowned out by the rising tide of anger and fear. The townsfolk were convinced that Sarah was guilty, and they were determined to make her pay. Big Joe, eager to prove his loyalty, grabbed a rope and began to fashion a noose. The sight of it sent a shiver down Martha's spine. "No," she cried, stepping forward. "You can't do this. You can't just condemn her without proof." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The mob was forming, fueled by lies and prejudice, and they were determined to have their revenge. They didn't care about justice, about truth, about anything but their own fear and anger. Sarah, meanwhile, was riding towards town, unaware of the danger that awaited her. She had gone to search for more information about the Miller family, hoping to find some clue, some connection to her past. She had no idea that she was riding straight into a trap, that the town she hoped to call home was about to turn against her in the most brutal way imaginable. The false accusation was about to turn deadly. The mob swelled, growing larger and more menacing with each passing moment. Fear and anger twisted the faces of the townsfolk, turning them into a single, unified force, driven by a primal need for vengeance. They armed themselves with whatever they could find: rifles, shotguns, pitchforks, and even rocks. Their eyes were fixed on the road leading into town, waiting for Sarah to appear. Old Man Hemlock, standing at the front of the mob, raised his hand, silencing the angry shouts. "When she comes," he said, his voice cold and resolute, "we'll give her a fair trial. Right here, right now." But everyone knew that there would be no fair trial. The mob had already made up its mind. Sarah was guilty, and she would pay the price. Martha, her heart pounding with fear, tried one last time to reason with them. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking with emotion. "Don't do this. You're making a mistake. You'll regret it." But her words were lost in the roar of the crowd. They were too far gone, consumed by their own fear and prejudice. Big Joe, grinning cruelly, tossed the noose over a sturdy branch of the old oak tree that stood in the center of town. The sight of it sent a wave of nausea through Martha. "This is wrong," she whispered to herself, tears streaming down her face. "This is terribly wrong." Just as the sun reached its highest point in the sky, Sarah appeared on the horizon, riding slowly towards town. She saw the mob waiting for her, their faces grim, their weapons raised. She knew, in that instant, that she was in grave danger. She reined in her horse, her heart pounding in her chest. She could turn and run, try to escape, but she knew it was no use. They would hunt her down, and they wouldn't stop until they had caught her. She took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. She would face them with courage and dignity, even if it meant facing death. As she rode closer, the mob surged forward, surrounding her, cutting off her escape. She was trapped, alone, and facing the full force of their hatred. The time for talking was over. The time for fighting had begun. The trap was set. Just as the mob was about to drag Sarah from her horse, a voice rang out, clear and strong, cutting through the angry shouts. "Stop!" All eyes turned to see Doc Evans, the town doctor, pushing his way through the crowd. He was an older man, respected for his skill and his calm demeanor, but he rarely interfered in town matters. His sudden intervention surprised everyone. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice filled with righteous anger. "Are you people out of your minds? Are you really going to lynch a woman without any proof?" Jed stepped forward, his face red with fury. "She poisoned the water supply, Doc," he snarled. "We found tracks leading right to her camp." "Tracks can be faked," Doc Evans retorted, his eyes blazing with indignation. "And even if she did poison the water, which I highly doubt, that doesn't give you the right to take the law into your own hands. We're supposed to be civilized people, not a bunch of savages." He turned to the crowd, his voice rising with passion. "Have you forgotten what it means to be just? Have you forgotten the principles that this town was founded on? We're supposed to be a beacon of hope, a place where everyone is treated fairly, regardless of their background or their beliefs." He pointed to Sarah, who sat on her horse, her face impassive, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "This woman is different, yes. She was raised by the Apaches, yes. But that doesn't make her a monster. That doesn't make her a criminal. She's a human being, just like us, and she deserves a fair hearing." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the townsfolk. "I know you're scared," he said, his voice softening. "I know you're angry. But don't let fear and anger cloud your judgment. Don't let them turn you into something you're not. Remember who you are. Remember what you stand for." His words hung in the air, a challenge to the mob's collective conscience. Some of the townsfolk began to waver, their faces etched with doubt. They looked at Sarah, then at each other, their eyes filled with uncertainty. Old Man Hemlock, sensing the shift in mood, stepped forward, his face grim. "Doc's right," he said, his voice surprisingly subdued. "We can't just lynch her without proof. We need to investigate to find out the truth." It wasn't a full retraction, but it was enough to break the mob's momentum. The tension in the air eased slightly, and for the first time since Sarah's arrival, there was a glimmer of hope in Harmony Gulch. The doctor's words had a powerful impact. The tide may be turning. The uneasy truce held for only a few minutes. Jed, his face contorted with rage, wasn't about to let Sarah escape. "Don't listen to him," he roared, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "She's tricked you all. She's an Apache, and Apaches can't be trusted." He lunged forward, grabbing Sarah's horse by the reins. "Let's finish this now," he shouted, pulling her towards the oak tree. The mob surged forward again, their anger reignited, their faces filled with a renewed sense of purpose. It seemed that Doc Evans's words had been in vain. But just as Jed was about to drag Sarah from her horse, a blood-curdling war cry echoed through the town. It was a sound that sent a shiver down the spines of even the most hardened men, a sound that spoke of raw power and unbridled fury. From the hills surrounding Harmony Gulch, a band of Apache warriors emerged, riding at full speed, their faces painted for war, their weapons raised high. They were led by a tall, imposing figure, his eyes blazing with anger, his face etched with years of hardship and battle. It was Cochise, the chief of the Warm Springs Apaches, and he had come to rescue his daughter. The sight of the Apaches sent the mob into a frenzy. Some screamed in terror, others raised their weapons, preparing to fight. Chaos erupted in Harmony Gulch. Jed, momentarily stunned by the sudden appearance of the Apaches, released Sarah's horse. He stared in disbelief as Cochise rode towards her, his face a mask of fury. Cochise reached Sarah, his eyes filled with concern. He spoke to her in Apache, his voice low and urgent. Sarah replied, explaining what had happened, telling him about the false accusation and the mob's attempt to lynch her. Cochise listened intently, his anger growing with each word. When Sarah finished, he turned to face the mob, his eyes blazing with fury. "You dare to harm my daughter," he roared, his voice echoing through the town. "You dare to accuse her of a crime she did not commit? You will pay for this." The Apaches raised their weapons, preparing to attack. The townsfolk, terrified by the sight of the warriors, hesitated, their courage faltering. A full-scale battle was about to erupt in Harmony Gulch, a battle that could wipe the town off the map. All the town's sins were about to catch up to it. A tense standoff ensued. The Apaches, fierce and unwavering, faced the townsfolk, who were now a mix of fear, anger, and uncertainty. The air crackled with tension, the silence broken only by the snorting of horses and the rustling of the wind. Sarah, seeing the impending bloodshed, knew she had to do something. She rode forward, placing herself between the Apaches and the townsfolk. "Stop!" she cried, her voice clear and strong, echoing through the town. "Please, everyone stop. This doesn't have to end in violence." She turned to Cochise, speaking to him in Apache. "Father, please don't attack them. They're scared, they're confused, but they're not all bad people." Cochise hesitated, his eyes filled with concern. He trusted Sarah's judgment, but he couldn't stand by and watch her be harmed. Sarah turned back to the townsfolk, her voice filled with emotion. "I know you're afraid of me," she said. "I know you don't understand me, but I'm not your enemy. I'm just trying to find my family, to understand where I come from." She told them her story about being lost as a child, about being raised by the Apaches, about the kindness they had shown her. She told them about her search for her parents, about Martha's help, about her hope for a better future. "I know it's hard to believe," she said, her voice cracking with emotion, "but I'm not a savage. I'm not a spy. I'm just a woman, trying to find her place in the world." She pleaded with them to put aside their fear and their prejudice, to see her as a human being, to give her a chance to prove herself. "Please," she begged, her voice filled with tears, "don't let hate destroy this town. Don't let it destroy us all." Her words, spoken with such sincerity and passion, had a profound effect on the townsfolk. Some of them lowered their weapons, their faces etched with shame. Others looked at each other, their eyes filled with doubt. Even Jed seemed to waver, his face contorted with a mixture of anger and confusion. He couldn't deny the sincerity in Sarah's voice, the pain in her eyes. For a moment, it seemed that Sarah's plea had worked, that the violence could be averted. But then, a voice shattered the fragile peace. "The truth will come out." It was Jed. The voice belonged to Billy, the young boy who had offered Sarah water. He stepped forward, his face pale but determined, clutching a piece of paper in his hand. "I saw him," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I saw Jed and his men putting something in the well. It wasn't Sarah. It was them." The townsfolk gasped, their eyes widening with disbelief. Jed, his face turning crimson, tried to silence Billy, but the boy stood his ground. "I found this," Billy said, holding up the piece of paper. "It's a letter. It says Jed wanted to blame Sarah so he could take her land." Doc Evans stepped forward, taking the letter from Billy. He read it aloud, his voice filled with indignation. The letter, written by one of Jed's men who had had a change of heart, detailed Jed's plan to frame Sarah for poisoning the well and to drive her out of town so he could claim the Miller family's land, which he believed contained a hidden vein of silver. The townsfolk stared at Jed, their faces filled with disgust. They had been tricked, manipulated by a man driven by greed and hatred. But that wasn't the only revelation. Martha stepped forward, her eyes filled with tears. "I remember something else," she said, her voice trembling. "After the wagon accident, I found a letter hidden in Mary Miller's belongings. It was addressed to Sarah from her grandmother back east. She wanted them to come visit to bring their little girl." Martha reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a faded, yellowed envelope. "I kept it all these years," she said. "I didn't know why, but now I understand." She handed the letter to Sarah, who took it with trembling hands. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the words. It was a letter from her grandmother, filled with love and longing, a confirmation of her identity, a link to her past. The evidence was overwhelming. Sarah was innocent, and Jed was guilty. The truth had finally come to light, shattering the lies and prejudices that had poisoned Harmony Gulch. All the pieces were coming together. The truth was out. The revelation of Jed's treachery sent shockwaves through the town. The townsfolk, realizing they had been manipulated and that they had almost lynched an innocent woman, turned against Jed and his men. "You lied to us," someone shouted, his voice filled with anger and betrayal. "You almost made us commit murder. We trusted you, Jed," another cried, "and you used our fear against us." The mob, which had been so unified in its hatred, now fractured, its members turning on each other. Some of Jed's own men, realizing the extent of his deceit, stepped away from him, their faces filled with shame. Old Man Hemlock, ever the pragmatist, saw the shift in power and quickly aligned himself with the new tide. "This is a disgrace," he declared, his voice ringing with condemnation. "Jed Stone, you are hereby banished from Harmony Gulch. You and your men, leave now and never return." Jed, his face contorted with rage and desperation, tried to defend himself, but his words were drowned out by the angry shouts of the crowd. He knew he was defeated, that he had lost everything. He glared at Sarah, his eyes filled with hatred. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I'll be back, and when I am, you'll pay for this." But his threat rang hollow. The townsfolk, no longer afraid, stood their ground, their faces filled with defiance. Jed and his remaining followers, defeated and humiliated, mounted their horses and rode out of town, disappearing into the dust and shadows. The Apaches, seeing that the threat had been neutralized, lowered their weapons, but Cochise remained wary, his eyes fixed on the townsfolk. He had seen too much treachery to trust them completely. Sarah, feeling a surge of relief and gratitude, turned to Cochise, speaking to him in Apache. She told him that the immediate danger was over, that the townsfolk now knew the truth. Cochise listened intently, his face softening slightly. He trusted Sarah's judgment, but he remained cautious. He knew that prejudice and fear could linger, even after the truth had been revealed. The tide was turning against the mob leaders. Harmony Gulch was changed forever. With Jed and his men gone, the mob slowly dispersed, the townsfolk returning to their homes, their faces etched with a mixture of shame and relief. Harmony Gulch was quiet, the tension that had gripped it for so long finally broken. One by one, the townsfolk approached Sarah, offering their apologies, their expressions sincere. They had been wrong. They admitted, blinded by fear and prejudice. They asked for her forgiveness, promising to do better, to be more open-minded, more accepting. Sarah, her heart filled with compassion, forgave them. She knew that it would take time for them to truly change, but she was willing to give them a chance. Cochise, seeing the genuine remorse in the faces of the townsfolk, finally lowered his guard. He spoke to them in broken English, his voice filled with dignity. "We are Apache," he said. "We value honor, respect, and family. We hope you will learn to do the same." He turned to Sarah, his eyes filled with love. "My daughter," he said in Apache, "you have shown them the way. You have shown them that even in the darkest of hearts, there is still hope for light." The decision was now Sarah's. She had found her family, discovered her past, and proven her innocence. She could choose to stay in Harmony Gulch, to build a new life among the people who had once tried to kill her. Or she could return to her Apache family, to the land and the people she had always known and loved. She looked at Martha, who smiled at her with tears in her eyes. She looked at Billy, who beamed at her with pride. She looked at Doc Evans, who nodded his head in approval. She looked at the townsfolk, who were now looking at her with hope and respect. Then she looked at Cochise, at the Apache warriors, their faces stoic but their eyes filled with love and longing. She knew that her heart was torn between two worlds, two families, two loves. After a long moment of contemplation, Sarah made her decision. She would stay in Harmony Gulch, but she would never forget her Apache family. She would work to bridge the gap between the two cultures, to promote understanding and respect, to ensure that what had happened would never happen again. She would be a bridge between two worlds. Sarah smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. She had found peace, she had found understanding, and she had found her place in the world. Harmony Gulch, once a place of fear and prejudice, was now a place of hope and reconciliation. The story had come to an end.